Okay. Good evening. Good evening. So last week we were talking about the mitzvah of telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim and how really there are these opinions that the mitzvah can begin already at Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is almost a week ago now, and that's and what that means to me, and what I said in the class, is this idea that from Rosh Chodesh, people should be planning what kinds of things they want to say at this Seder. And what I want to talk about tonight is about the mitzvah of telling the story. And I hope if I succeed in my plans, that I will give over some ideas that people can use, in their Seder. And the verse that really is the source of the mitzvah and appears in the Haggadah really twice. Once for the son that doesn't know how, the child that doesn't know how to ask questions, and then later on the obligation of telling the story. And that verse, which I have on the page, is chapter 13, verse 8 in Shmot. And it says, "V'higadeta levincha bayom hahu lemor," and you should lahagid, Haggadah, magid, you should say over, you should relate. Now, the translation in front of us here, which is JPS, says you shall explain. We're going to see a lot of translations for this term over the evening. So you should relate to your child on that day, saying, and specifically your message to the child should be, or should include, Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li. Because of what Hashem did for me when I went free from Egypt. So we really have to talk about what kinds of things we can do or should do to make the experience of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, relating the story, personal. That's what we really have to discuss this evening. And we're going to see some halachic things. We're going to see a few, I hope, pedagogic ideas to help out. And I want to start with Rabbeinu Bechaye. Rabbeinu Bechaye, who was a student of the Ramban, or a student of the Ramban, even though he really associated himself and identified with the Ramban. And he died around 1340. And he wrote a parish on Chumash that this comes from, that was fascinating in that he would give pshat, literal meaning, then he would give a drasha, he would give a homiletic meaning, then he would give a philosophic meaning, and then sometimes he'd give a Kabbalistic meaning. And in this particular quote that I have on our verse is a Kabbalistic approach. Rabbeinu Bechaye, a Kabbalistic approach. It's a little weird, the idea, actually, but we'll try to put it in context and see what we can do with it. So he said, the Kabbalistic approach to our verse, when we say to our child, because of what God did for me when I came out from Egypt, because I wasn't there, but I still say it's like as if it happened to me. But the Kabbalistic approach is, the verse tells us that the fact that I was able to leave Egypt, I personally was able to leave Egypt, was all for the sake of his glory and his name. God did it for his own aggrandizement. It's like, this is my God, and I will beautify him. I will praise him to the sky. That it wasn't about us. We were like pawns in the story. It was really about the greater glory of God in this world. The fascinating idea. It is somewhat similar to what Moshe exclaimed in the song after crossing the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. Okay, which I sort of blew it by saying it ahead. Okay, a complementary reference to the Shekhinah, including God's highest presence. In other words, the purpose of all this was somehow to bring godliness into our world. That's what it was about. It wasn't for us. It was for the Shekhinah, it was for the divine presence. Interesting idea. Okay. The meaning is that the Shekhinah, divine presence, in Israel is not merely something needed for the ordinary Israelite, but it is a phenomenon necessary even in celestial circles. We have to believe that the choosing of the Jewish people and the miraculous events that God does on our behalf, we have to believe that not only does that have an impact on us, of course, but on this world, that we believe that God's presence it's for the B'nai Noach too. And that especially when you read in Yeshayahu, Isaiah, and Zechariah, the visions of Yemot HaMashiach, it's for the whole world. It's for all of humanity. But the Rabbeinu Bechaya is saying it's not just for the Jews and humanity, it's for heaven too. That somehow God or God's presence in some way benefits in ways that it's hard for us to understand from this. That it's about bringing godliness into the world. I'm going to return to that idea in a minute. This is what Joshua had in mind when he said, after Israel were humiliated, by I, and what are you going to do, ba'avor shimcha? What are you going to do about your reputation in the world? So what Rabbeinu Bechaya is saying, and I don't know if you necessarily want to say this at your Seder, but it's a fascinating idea that God takes us out of Egypt and develops a special relationship with the Jewish nation, starts with Avram, but that was a personal relationship. The national relationship starts in Egypt and continues at Yam Suf, at the Sea of Reeds, and continues at Har Sinai, that the purpose of God loving and saving and doing things for the Jewish people is because it not only is good for us, somehow it's good for God and heaven. And that's something that we here in Eretz Yisrael have to think about. When we say, we really want the temple rebuilt. And when, these terrible people from Iran shoot rockets indiscriminately in Eretz Yisrael, and some of them were aimed and were going to hit the Temple Mount if we didn't knock them down. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, saw those shots. It's like we are the only ones who care about God's presence and reputation in this world. So part of telling the story, it's not just about me. It's a big part of a big picture, which is really an infinite picture. And we should feel that we're a cog in something greater than ourselves. And how can you get that into your Seder? It is more difficult, but it's an important idea. I want to skip to a commentary, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv, which is the last commentary on the page, backside of the page, or second page, way at the bottom, who says the opposite. Now, there's and especially this year, when the Jewish nation is a little bit taking it on the chin. This is a tough year for our people, not just in Eretz Yisrael, but in Chutz La'aretz also. This is not such a great year for us, and we should be concerned not only for the reputation and the safety of Klal Yisrael, we should be concerned for God's reputation, because we are Nitzigei Hashem. We are the representatives of God in this world. And that can and should come out in our Seder as well. That it's about the symbiotic relationship between God and Klal Yisrael. Look what the Netziv says. It brings up another point that's very important and very beautiful. This is just like a famous Gemara. You can see it's quoted afterwards. It's in Sanhedrin, folio, daf 37. Okay? This is just like the Gemara. Everyone is required to say, Bishvili nivra olam. For my sake, the universe was created. Everybody should feel that they have a place in this universe, and that God does things. God cares about me. The world was created for me. I'm important. Everybody's important. Likewise, everyone should say that for me alone was the exodus from Egypt. When I say to my children and grandchildren, Ba'avor zeh Hashem li, it's because I am a beneficiary of this event. And so we have to look at it from both sides of the coin, that we have to feel, wow, God did this for me. But we also have to feel we're doing this for God. It's very important that Jews develop this sense of symbiosis, of connection back and forth between us and Hashem. That we care about God and God's reputation, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about us and our reputation. And that this should be expressed at the Seder. In other words, when Pharaoh does terrible things to us, it's bad for God too. It's not just us who are being put down. And that's true in 5784 as well. This is not a good year for the Jews, which means it's also bad. It's also bad for the way people relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let me just finish the Netziv before we go on to the next point. That for me alone was exodus. The purpose of the statement is clearly understood to raise up the heart of the believer. Give me a good feeling about myself, to prepare and dedicate oneself to be worthy of God's 10 statements of creation. Okay? Now, as the creation was done through Asara Ma'amarot, 10 statements. Similarly, one must believe that the wonders of Egypt were also for him alone, that he should be ready for the 10 commandments, the 10 statements of creating the world, and the 10 commandments for coming out of Egypt. Similarly, one must believe that wonders of these were also for me alone. This should raise one's soul in the ways of Torah. It's important that everybody feels good about themselves, that everybody should have a healthy self-esteem. It's a very important idea that Rabbi Twersky, Alav Shalom, used to talk about all the time. And the last time I got to talk to him about it was actually in Ashkelon. The last time I saw him was one Shabbos. He was visiting family in Ashkelon. And it's we're required to have this good self-esteem. So it's for Hashem and for us, because we're a shidduch. We are related to each other. Point number one. Please go back to the beginning on the front page. The Gan Na'ul. The Gan Na'ul is also a Kabbalistic approach to things. The Gan Na'ul was Avraham Abulafia, and it was written toward the end of the 13th century, 1289, 1290. This book was written, and it was a commentary on a number of things. Number one, the Haggadah, but also Shir Shira. So he said, he was also a mystic. So he said, and the intent is not only to inform our children who did not know of this great act of the Lord, rather even the sages. The Seder isn't just for the people that don't know the story. And we say this right in the Haggadah. It's also for the people who do know the story. The worst thing you can say at the Seder is, oh, I know all that. I remember one time, this is going back to 1987, a long time ago. No, before. It was 1981. I was in Margate, New Jersey. I was teaching a conservative afternoon Hebrew school. It was a terrible experience. I love teaching, but this was a terrible experience. And it comes, like around Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and I pass out those red and yellow covered Haggadahs to everybody in the class. And the first thing they say to me, oh, we know all that. These kids don't know anything. I mean, they were in the 5th and 6th grade of public school, and like the 3rd or 4th grade of Hebrew school. These kids didn't know it. But their first reaction when you give them a Haggadah is, I know all that. I know all that. And the whole attitude, the Gan Na'ul is saying, the opposite. Even the greatest Chachamim are supposed to say, gee, I still have to learn more. There's still things about this story that escape me. And everybody should awaken their intellectual curiosity on that night. It's about what I don't know, and I want to find things out. And that's why it says, even if we were all sages, all knowledgeable about the Torah, it would still be a commandment upon us to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And anyone who adds in telling the story of the Exodus, behold, he is praiseworthy. Every year, you should try to find out something new. And it doesn't have to be, sometimes a kid comes up with an idea. And it's not about knowing the story. It's about finding out what I don't know about the story. And that's critically important. What don't I know? And that's going to, hopefully tweak my intellectual curiosity. Okay, I want to take a look at Rabbi Sachs, who makes an interesting point. Where did it come from? This Jewish passion for questions. It's like you say, how come Jews ask questions so much? And the answer is always, who says that we ask questions all the time? It's like every question is answered with a question. I mean, that's just every question. The fact that there are questions in the Haggadah is like obvious. Jews can't talk without asking questions and moving their hands. Those are the two requirements: question marks and hands for a Jew to talk. Clearly, it owes much to the fact that 3 times in the Torah, Moshe speaks of children asking for an explanation of religious practices. And of course, there's the fourth child who doesn't ask, and we approach him, and that was the verse at the top of the page. Yet there's a paradox in the idea of collective memory. How can I remember what did not happen to me? We have this idea. We ask questions so that we can arouse ideas in our collective memory, but I can't have I've never been in Egypt. Even as a tourist, I've never been there. How can I have any recollection of any of this stuff? An event that happened long before I was born. I want to make a point here about events that happened before we were born. We have a different relationship with events that happened before we were born. And this is a terrible example, but I think everyone can come up with a similar one. When I was a little kid, I was 11 years old, Roger Maris, 1961, broke the home run record of Babe Ruth. Okay, not a big deal. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's okay. Nothing is on newborn. He had 61 home runs, and Babe Ruth had hit 60 home runs 34 years earlier. Now, to me, as an 11-year-old, that seemed like a very, very old record because it happened, all of these years, 23 years before I was born. In 1998, that record was finally broken by a man named Mark McGwire. It's not important, okay? But that record was 37 years old. 3 years older than Babe Ruth's record. When Mark McGwire broke the record, one of the first things I said about it was, this is interesting. Roger Maris's record hasn't lasted so long. Because I was alive when the record was set, 37 years didn't seem like a lot. But because the other record was set before I was born, 34 years seemed like an eternity. We look at events before we were alive differently. Our perspective is different than we look at events that happened during our lifetime. And I think that's the point that Rabbi Sachs is trying to bring out. And if he isn't bringing out that point, he should be, because it's an important idea. Okay. How can I remember things that happened? An event that took place long before I was born. The answer given by the Seder on Pesach is through reenactment, by living again the events of ancient times as if they were happening now. I have to do something to inject myself into the story. I can wear a robe. I can, or like the Sephardim, I can walk around the table with the matzah on my shoulder. Or there was a family in Stanford used to put a box of sand, and people would walk through the sand to show that they were going out into the desert. We can do things to make us feel like we're going through this experience. That is the significance of the statement of the sages that on Pesach, generation by generation, each person must see himself as if he himself had personally, I added the word personally, it's not in the text, he had personally come out of Egypt at the beginning of the Seder by lifting the matzah and declaring, this is the bread of oppression. I was going to say affliction. Okay, oppression. Our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. We make the leap across time, across the millennia, and turn then into now. I like that expression. Turn then into now. We're trying to relive the event, turn then into now. There used to be a TV show that was called You Are There. And the show was in the 50s, maybe into the 60s, but I remember, and they would take some historical event and they would try to reenact it. Washington crossing the Delaware, Alexander the Great crossing into Asia. They would try to take some famous and reenact in such a way that you could say, oh, now I understand it. Well, we have to, lahavdil, do the same thing at our Seder. We have to, you are there. We have to somehow inject ourselves into story and think about what it was like and talk about it. We have to turn then into now. It is because of what the Lord did for me when I personally went out from Egypt. In these words, tradition heard the continuous present, the past that lives on, the event that speaks to me in the first person singular. This event is still speaking to me personally. And that's what you should share. What does it say to me as an individual? I want to skip again. And if you go to Rabbi Shraga Simmons, whatever, who's a Rebbe at what yeshiva in Yerushalayim? Oh, I don't remember. Okay, I apologize to Rabbi Simmons. He's a nice fellow. I only met him once, twice, but very nice. People often like to think of human history as basically beginning with their birth. That's the same thing I felt like the Babe Ruth record. If it happened before I was here, it was a long time ago. If it happened after I was here, it's recent. We look at history that way. Oh, sure, we can imagine as far back as our grandparents. Most of us had, relationship with grandparents, so they told us stories about Europe at the end of the 19th century, or stories about the First World War, those kinds of things, right? But beyond that, it all seems so distant and foreign and strange. Deep down, who are you? Your family may be geographically located in California for the past 20 years, and you may come from 3 generations of retail clothiers, but is that really the extent of your heritage? Is that as far deep as your roots go? Perhaps the best way for us to view our role in Jewish history as witnesses is that on the night of the Seder, each family in each generation is raised to the level of a link in a golden necklace that has no beginning and no end, and it can therefore remember vividly all the events that occurred to our people, including the transcendent events of the Exodus and our receiving the Torah from heaven. In other words, we have to do our best to go beyond our grandparents. And people, especially, my mother, Alea Shalom, used to like to talk about, her parents lived in the Ukraine, and, but she thought that they came from some other places earlier. She was thinking that maybe some of them were Khazars and she would try. I don't think she knew anything about these things. I think it was all speculation, but she would try to make connections for how her parents got to this small town south of Kiev. And it was interesting to listen to her because she was clearly relating to a lot of Jewish history. And we have to do the same thing. And I think it was my mother, Alair Shalom, that got me interested in history. I love history. That was my major in college. And history can be very boring. I know a lot of people say that right away, but it really can, if we do it right, can connect us up to all sorts of wonderful things and make us feel connected to the past and want to hand it over to our kids for the future. Okay, I want to do two Rav Chaim Soloveitchik and the Rav back on the front sheet. I want to do them much more quickly than they deserve. They deserve, each one of them is going to talk about Rav Chaim, 4 special things about the educational process of the night, and the Rav is going to say 5. Rav Chaim Brisk was, who died in 1918, was the grandfather of Rabbi Soloveitchik. And so when I learned with the Rav, he often would quote from his grandfather. Grandfather used to say. So let's start with Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim explains that Sipo Yitzim Mitzrayim, this mitzvah of telling the story, has its peculiar characters expressed in 4 ways. The Rav's going to add 5. Okay, so we're going to have 9 peculiarities, 5 special things about this mitzvah. Can't say that word. Okay. The first one from Reb Chaim. It should ideally be articulated to another person. I know you're chayav to have a Seder if you're all alone, and I've heard stories of people who were traveling and had a Seder all by themselves, and I feel like crying every time I hear about this. But what are you going to do? We know what happens. But the ideal situation is you're telling it to somebody else, and first you're the narrator, and then you become the audience. It should be a give and take, a back and forth. Okay, that's A. B, it must begin with genut. Genut means it should start off with negative things. In other words, it's a success story. It's a story with a happy ending. So it starts down here and you build higher, higher, higher. Okay, so you have to start off with negatives. Now, there are 2 different negatives that we start off with. One is we were slaves. Another is we were idolaters. A physical negative and a spiritual. Okay. C, it must include the performances of the night. I have to use visual aids. The Pesach, the Korban Pesach, which we don't have anymore because we don't have the temple, the matzah, the maror, all of these items on, and I can use the egg, I can use all of the things on the Seder plate. I'm supposed to use visual aids because we know some people are audio learners, some people are visual learners, and we're supposed to be expert educators this night. So you must use the visual aids. 4, Dalit, next to the last line of this paragraph, it must mention that today, the night of the 15th of Nisan, is the day we left Egypt, just like we must mention on Shabbat that today is Shabbat. In other words, in the telling of the story, it's the anniversary of the event. Now, for some people, the idea of an anniversary or a birthday is not a big deal. But there's probably somebody at your Seder to whom the idea of an anniversary or a birthday is a big deal. And you say, today's the birthday of the Jewish nation. Today's the anniversary. And tonight is special. Now, he doesn't give the Kabbalistic interpretation. The Kabbalistic interpretation of that idea is when we travel around the sun every year, we're not only traveling in space, we're traveling in time. And when I get to the 15th of Nisan again, I'm back in that part of space where this event happened. I travel in such a way that different days of the year have a different character, nature to them. The Kabbalists believe this idea very, very firmly, that we're back to the time. We've entered that time zone of when the Jews left Egypt. So those are the 4 ideas of Reb Chaim. Next paragraph, the Rav, 5 ideas. Okay? The Rav has pointed out 5 distinctions between Zechirat and Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, every day of the year, we're supposed to mention Zechir, mention the Jews went out from Egypt. Now, we do that in Shema, in the 3rd paragraph of Shema, and we say, that Hashem took us out of Egypt. We said that every day. We just have to mention it. But on the night of the Seder, it's not enough. We have to do, instead of just mentioning, we have to relive it. We have to experience it. And that's what the Rav is going to say. There are 5 ways that we experience it. First, Sipor consists of discussing. That was terrible. Discussing Yetziat Mitzrayim in details. The first thing is details. You got to talk about it as much as you can, fill in all the details. Second, 3rd line, Zechira does not require Hallel. On a regular day, when should I say, we're so happy that God took us out of Egypt, let's say Hallel. No. But on the night of the Seder, as soon as we finish telling the story, we say, Lefichach, therefore we have to praise Hashem, and we start Hallel. And we sing Hallel. So in other words, if you tell the story, not just mention the story, but tell the story well enough, everybody should feel gratitude towards Hashem that gets expressed as Hallel. Third, Sipor means a total and all-encompassing experience. Zechira, I just mentioned. Sipor, it's got to be listening, speaking, tasting, seeing, smelling. I mean, you smell the maror, you smell. I mean, it's got to be all of your senses. It's an all-encompassing experience, which must be sustained the entire night. This idea is underscored by the Rambam, who rules that it's obligated to appear as if he's leaving Egypt right now. Yet a 4th, that's now the 4th, is based on the fact that the Rambam refers to Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim only in terms of the miracles which happened in Egypt proper. Even though it's okay to mention crossing the Red Sea, even though it's okay to mention other events that have happened in Jewish history, we've got to focus primarily on the 10 plagues and the miracles that happened in Egypt. That's got to be our focus, even though we can bring up other things. And I'm in, what line is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th line, a final distinction between just mentioning and truly telling the story is, based on the Rambam, is that Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim cannot be merely a restatement of what everybody already knows. The Rav requires that there be a chidush, something new. Now, sometimes you're to Seder with other people, and you can rely on somebody else saying something new. But let's say you're at a Seder with the same people there at your Seder last year. Someone is required. You can give an assignment. Find out something new that was never said at any of our Siddurim before. It's not so hard. There are, I'm looking, I have 2 bookshelves filled with Haggadahs, and, many of them have brand new ideas or different ideas. It's obligatory that something in the storytelling be new. I used to have a custom of buying a new Haggadah every year. We've sort of run out of space on the bookshelf. I actually did buy one this year because it was on sale and I couldn't resist. But I had it was a custom to buy a new Haggadah because I wanted to have something new to say. There must be something new. And today you don't have to buy a new Haggadah. You can find something online. You can search, but you must have, the Rav is adamant about this. There must be a chidush, a brand new idea at your Seder. Okay. Where to find it? Maybe one of some of the ideas we've been saying tonight will be good, but or maybe you can do look online, or maybe you can buy a new Haggadah. Okay. Rav Yosef Rimon, who until this year, that was the last Haggadah I bought. I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago. Really nice Haggadah. Rabbi Yosef Rimon is a Rebbe at Yeshivat Har Etzion, and he said something. It's not just that he said something nice. I like the way he said it. We're required to bring into action the inner sensation that rolls over us on Pesach. There's something inside me, and I'm supposed to bring it out at the Pesach Seder. This idea, which develops some inner feeling, must be sensed by others as well as myself from the outside. The soul pulsates, the heart pounds, many sensations take hold of us. We're departing slavery for freedom. It's exciting. We must view this in light of the Rambam, who wrote, a person is obligated to show himself as if he personally departed now from the bondage of Egypt. That is to say, that the obligation is only to feel free, is not only to feel free, rather to display himself as a free person. This showing oneself is uniquely expressed in our reclining, which was an ancient method for displaying freedom. We should do things that show that we're free. I don't know, maybe you wear something new, or you talk about an experience that you found freeing. That I just got a license to do this. Something new happened to me that I should feel brand new and free and whatever. This idea changes. We're supposed to talk about things that change us. And we're supposed to not only talk about, we're supposed to tell others and listen from others. Listen to this quote from somebody you probably didn't expect to see on the sheet. The Dalai Lama came to Eretz Yisrael in the mid-90s. I actually had a neighbor in Efrat, he's since passed away, very sad, relatively young, of cancer, who was one of those involved. He had been he was about Tshuva, and he had been involved in Buddhism in his journey before he found Orthodoxy. And so he was one of those who was like one of the guides. And it was just interesting that they brought him 96, I'm going to say, to Eretz Yisrael. And he came for a specific reason. He's expressing it here. In our dialogue with rabbis and Jewish scholars, the Tibetan people have learned about the secrets of Jewish spiritual survival in exile. Now, I don't know how many of you know about Tibet and the Buddhists. Buddhism had its headquarters in Tibet, and it was conquered in 1954 by the communist Chinese. And a few years later, the Dalai Lama and his closest advisors ran away and went into exile. And they've lived in exile. And he noticed that every nation who ever went into exile soon disappeared. It maybe took 2 generations, but by the 3rd generation, they were gone. Nations, civilizations, even religions don't exist well in exile except for Jews. We have succeeded in continuing to survive in exile. How? So the Dalai Lama wanted to learn this. So he came to Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And the one secret of remaining alive is telling the story is the Passover Seder. The Passover Seder keeps us alive. We tell the story and we bring up new ideas and we revitalize it, and it revitalizes us. We tell the story every year better and better, and it keeps us connected to to the religion. Through it for 2,000 years, even in very difficult times, Jewish people remember their liberation from slavery to freedom. And this has brought you hope in times of difficulty. We are grateful to our Jewish brothers and sisters for adding to their celebration of freedom the thought of freedom for the Tibetan people. Now, I don't mention the Tibetan people at my Seder, but I guess he bumped into somebody who did. But we sometimes have missed the point, but the Dalai Lama didn't miss the point. It's us telling the story and making the story mine. Means I'm not in exile because I'm in the story. I can only be in exile if I'm cut off from my story. So we have to tell the story and we have to make it ours. You know, someone once made the cute pun, you know, we have to, on the Seder, we take his story and make it my story. And it's very important. It's very important that we do that. Okay, Rav Weinreb. I like Rav Weinreb. He was a rabbi and psychologist in Baltimore for many years, and then he became the head of the OU. And, I mean, he's basically retired now, but he's in Yerushalayim. He has a home here as well as in Baltimore, and he's back and forth quite a bit. And he's just very much like Rabbi Twersky, Oliver Shalom, you know, being a rabbi and a psychologist. It's like somehow that connection, you know, that combination really works. But anyways, Reb Weinreb, as I'm starting to run out of time here. Okay. Reb Weinreb said, we are called upon to personally, I'm going to return to this idea in about 10 minutes, just before we leave. We are called upon to personally visualize ourselves as having experienced the Exodus in all of its details. We've got to say it all as if it, at least parts of it, happened to me. How many of us are capable of such an imaginative feat? For me, this is the greatest challenge of the entire Passover experience. To personalize the story and then tell it to others. Imagining myself as a helpless slave and then reliving the frustration of the initial phases of the redemption. I mean, the Jews were really upset. When you look at the beginning of chapter 6, they were ready to stone Moshe Rabbeinu, you know, because Pharaoh added more work to them. I mean, they were really, you know, at wit's end. And they couldn't listen to him. They were just in a bad place. Living through the Passover experience safely protected in our slave quarters while gulping down that first Passover meal. He says gulping down because they had to do it, you know, quickly, okay? And feeling in the depths of my bones the burst of sudden freedom, casting aside bonds and chains and marching as a free man into an unknown wilderness. He said, I don't know how to flip a switch and relive all of that stuff. Is this not an impossible task? How am I to, quote, see myself as if I personally left Egypt, unquote? Ramban offers us a profound insight. The Ramban says a slave is not free to act ethically and morally. This is also true of one whose choices in life are dictated by a political propaganda, cultural influence, pressures to conform blindly, and other forces with which we are all familiar nowadays. So many of the things we do aren't our personal choices, but everybody else around us is doing it, so we do it. I mean, it could be something simple like, the kind of shirts we wear, the kind of shoes we wear. I mean, it could be just those kinds of simple things, but quite often it's much more profound events in our lives. Did they eat matzah at a Seder before? Yes, they did eat matzah that night. They ate matzah that night as well as the Korban Pesach. They ate matzah already that night. Ramban's concept of the status of our forefathers is explained beautifully by the Netziv, not the same Netziv we did, but different Netziv. Same person, but different quote. For the Netziv, the defining quality of our patriarchs was the characteristic of Yashrut. They were yashar, straight, honest, upright, trustworthy. They were Boy Scouts. I mean, they were just nice people that you knew their word was their bond. An ethic that transcends piety and extends to the ability to relate to people very different from oneself. You know, there are a lot of people that find it very easy to keep the mitzvah, but they don't always find it easy to be nice to other people. I was thinking about this when driving in a Haredi neighborhood this afternoon, and the driving habits were not very nice. It was just interesting phenomenon. And these are frum people, I'm sure wonderful people. But the frumkeit, which means we're free to follow the Torah, should be translated into yashrut, to really being upright, kind, trustworthy, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. For the Netziv, the defining quality of a patriarch was the character of Yashrut, the ethic that transcends piety and extends the ability to relate to people very different from oneself. In other words, it's more important. It's more important than checking all the hashgachas on the potato chips you eat. It's more important to be a nice person, even if it means that that you might have only one hashgacha on your potato chips, God forbid, right? Working together with others in a harmonious fashion. We now know of one way that we can see ourselves as if we have left Egypt. Following the Tziv, our charge is to reclaim what the former calls the status of our forefathers, and what the latter terms the ability to act yashar. I show that I'm free by just caring about other people. You hear stories from people in the camps, in the concentration camps, and sadly, I knew a few people that told these stories. To survive, they could only think about themselves. It was slavery, just like in Egypt. Slaves cannot be kind and considerate of others. All they can think about is what they have to do to survive. One of the ways we show that we're free people is by acting like I don't have to just worry about myself. I can worry about you. I can fulfill I care about you. And that starts at the Seder. At the Seder, you're helping people, you're talking to people, you're giving of yourself to people, and it begins there. But it should be your whole life. And that's what it means to really be free. I sometimes, it's going to sound terrible, I sometimes see people that are very religious who don't seem free. They really seem bogged down in the minutiae of life. And I sometimes think they're missing the big picture, and it's sort of sad. And the Seder should be an opportunity to expand those horizons and see ourselves as concerned and caring about everybody. And Rav Weinreb, I think his point is very, very powerful and true. Okay, we're running out of time. The Malbim. The authors of the Haggadah come to add and explain that the expectation isn't just a description and imaging alone. But the truth is, not only were our ancestors redeemed by the Holy One, blessed be He, but even we ourselves were redeemed with them. We have to feel that the redemptive act of Hashem freed me, redeemed me. I feel as a beneficiary of those events. I am, like Rabbi Weinreb said as well, I am a good person. I am a dedicated to others person and dedicated to Torah person because of the events of the Exodus. This is the logical extension of what we said in explanation of the verse. Tomorrow, when your child will ask, what is the meaning of these asks? That's the question of the Tam, the relatively simple child. That means after all those who left Egypt have died, then we answer the child that we were redeemed from there. This fits into what we said in Avadim Hayinu. If God had not redeemed us from Egypt, we, our children and our children's children, still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. That really means we were indeed redeemed ourselves from Egypt. If God hadn't redeemed them, we'd still be there, which means we're the beneficiaries of that redemption. This point is made at the beginning of the story, as well as at the end when we say we're obligated to see ourselves in each and every generation as if we went out from Egypt. We're saying it already at the beginning. We wouldn't be redeemed. Now, we would still be lacking something spiritually if our ancestors hadn't been redeemed. Maybe we wouldn't have gotten the Torah. Maybe we'd still actually be slaves. We don't know. And that demonstrates that we must indeed, requires us to feel that we were redeemed from Egypt. We have to feel that what happened then still affects me. I think I want to add an idea to all of this. And it's a little piece of advice. And look, I don't know how much I'm going to be leading the Seder this year. I'm going to be, part of a larger Seder at my son's house. And so I may not have an opportunity to say it then, so I'm going to say it now. I think part of the story, and a very big part of the story, is not just that we feel that we're beneficiaries of what happened. You got to start with that. But that things that happened in my life reflected that experience. And I think everybody should be able sometime during the Seder to tell a story. Grandchildren love to hear stories from us. They really do. I'm not sure why, but in the story, you should tell them about a sense of relief, a sense of escape from peril that happened in your own life. I've told my kids, I don't know if I told my grandchildren, about a time when I was in a traffic accident and I felt like, I was saved from it. But all of us have other stories that we can say. By the way, you can tell personal stories, like I said, an accident or perhaps an operation or something that happened. But I think that there are moments that all of us have experienced that our children and grandchildren haven't experienced, that I think that we should be able to relate to them. When we had this sense of, wow, it's over. Isn't this amazing that this happened? I definitely think of June 6th, 1967, the second day of the 6-Day War. The first day of the war, I was really depressed and crying. I was 17 and I was really, really concerned. I really thought the reports coming out of Egypt are true and that Israel had already lost the war and a new Holocaust was unfolding before our eyes. Then we woke up the next morning, Monday morning, to find out it was all a lie. We won the war. And it was just, after the first few minutes, it was just wrap up. And it's like that feeling of wow. And it was just like that. That doesn't happen that often in our lives or even in history. And I think it's important to tell the kids and grandkids that these kinds of things have happened in your life. And that's what it was like in Egypt. And it's amazing. It's amazing when it happens. I was talking about this year on Purim, but I remember Purim in 1991 when we were all scared, sitting in our, in our closed rooms, our sealed rooms, because the Scuds were being shot from Iraq to here, and we were afraid that they had poison gas, on the rockets, and so the sirens went off, and we ran into these rooms that were covered in plastic, and it was very, very scary. And then it came Purim, and we found out that the Americans and the entire, the entire alliance coalition had won, and everybody was dancing in the streets, literally dancing in the streets with the plastic, We were ripping the plastic off the sealed rooms, and we were running through the streets. I was in Nefrat at the time, but we're literally running in the streets with the plastic because, wow, it's over. And I think it's important to relate these kinds of things at the Seder and say, that's how they felt in Egypt. And I think this year, it's very important to tell these kinds of stories because it's not such a great year. And I think we should be able to say, we're going to have very soon a day like that we can, feel this, this war is over, that cloud from Gaza has been removed, and wow, it's great, and we're free again. And it's going to happen. And we have to have that kind of optimism on Pesach at the Seder to talk about these things and be honest about the things that, that scared us during this war, maybe scared us Saturday night. The people in Ashkelon, God bless you. You had a number of scary nights. We all know that and felt for you. I think it's important to talk about these things because the Pesach experience, yes, we experience that, but the Jewish people experience Pesach experiences throughout our history. And there isn't a Jew alive. There's never been a Jew who didn't have something happen in his life that reminded him of the fact that God does bring us me'avdut lecherut, brings us out from bondage to freedom. And there's a note on the screen. Yeah, but we have to believe that the geula, including the hostages, is going to come. We have to have that faith, and the faith and optimism that we have in the present difficulties has to be based on the fact we lived through these other bad times and we came out whole. And we have to tell the story. And telling the story, like the Dalai Lama said, is what keeps us alive and keeps us going. And that's part of the Seder. Look, I don't know how much of the Seder you can spend on these things, but I think it's important that we put ourselves personally into the story of the Seder. That's what it means when it says, this is what happened to me when I left Egypt. Because everybody has a leaving Egypt experience, either literally or metaphorically. And it's very important that we share these things. That's our role as the senior members of the Seder table. And I hope everybody, number one, has a wonderful Seder with family and friends. And that's number one. And number two, I hope even in this difficult 5784, I hope we have the proper enthusiasm and optimism at the Seder, even this year. And Be'ezrat Hashem, it's that enthusiasm and optimism that will help us, for the geula we need now, and for the total geula also, hopefully very, very soon. Okay, Chag Kasher v'Sameach to everybody. As I see that's what Gail just put on the screen too, and thank you for joining. Please let people know that the recording will be up tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Thanks for taking our time from your busy Pesach preparation time.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. Bye-bye.